is the DeFi Decoded podcast by 9 Point Partners. The ideas and opinions expressed in this podcast should not be taken as investment advice. Always consult with your financial advisor before investing.
Hello, and welcome back to another episode of DeFi Decoded. I'm Alex Tapscott here with co-host Andrew Young. On the show in the past, we've talked a lot about how Web3 and blockchain is truly global. You know, they say that technology helps to flatten the world. Well, if that's true, I personally view Web3 kind of as a steamroller, creating new ways and opportunities for people to earn money and to own assets and to build wealth on a globally level playing field. This is a toolkit that is available to really anyone with an internet connection, regardless of whether they're banked or if they're in a country with, a government that provides an ID or any other kinds of services. It's something that I think really does truly leapfrog a lot of legacy infrastructure and legacy systems, and that's something that's really exciting. At the same time, there's a real implementation challenge of actually doing that, delivering services to people in Africa. You know, it requires entrepreneurship on a really ambitious scale to create products and services that people can use. And so it's on that topic of implementation that we are going to focus today. We're really excited actually to be joined by kind of the perfect guest for this, Cédric Jeannot, who's an award-winning serial entrepreneur and investor and the co-founder and CEO of BeMobile Africa, which is a neobank that is focused on the unbanked and the underbanked in Africa. The company provides access to banking services such as bank accounts, remittances, and savings built with blockchain and with AI. BeMobile Africa is known for its payment network, enabling money to move across 30 markets in real time and for free using stablecoins, as well as its savings offering pretty attractive yields using DeFi infrastructure, which is quite fascinating as well. In 2022, the company became a Harvard Business School case study. And in 2023, on invitation, Cédric addressed the MBA class at MIT Sloan School of Business. There's a lot more really interesting things about Cédric, but I want to pause on the introduction and just say welcome to the show. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
So tell us about your background, Cédric. You said your origin story before we turned on the record button, but how is it that you came to be focused on Africa, this opportunity, and also how you came to realize that this new toolkit, blockchain AI, was critical to solving the problem that you'd identified?
So on the Africa piece, that's totally personal, nothing business. I spent a lot of my years as a kid on the continent in multiple countries. So this is home, and quite familiar with the place because I've spent so many years there, but never had any kind of work engagement. It was just living there due to my parents' work. And blockchain came later on because by trade, I actually have a PhD in computer science, but my expertise is cryptography, as in encryption. And I got into the kind of crypto rabbit hole because I had this friend of mine who heard about Bitcoin really early on and who really wanted to have a technical opinion on, is this thing really secure? Is the encryption and the way the protocols work, proper? And so I got in more from a technology analysis as someone who comes from cybersecurity and who understand the hashing, the encryption, and all that stuff, to really look at it if it was, was it a good technology, not a good technology? Is it indeed what it says on the tin? And so my first few years in the blockchain space was really on the technical side. Obviously, I'm not that smart because I didn't buy any Bitcoin back then. I should. But, that led to, once you open the door, obviously, it's just, you cannot unsee what you've seen. And then the rest has been kind of in blockchain, crypto, and any variation of.
Yeah. And so you're a serial entrepreneur and an investor. So were you an entrepreneur before all of this journey into crypto began? Like, what was your path to becoming an entrepreneur in the space? Is it something that you've been doing for a long time?
Yeah, I proudly never had a real job. So I guess this is all I do, start businesses, and some work, some don't work, some work really well. It really depends. But I guess I'm someone who's very kind of purpose driven. So all the things I've done I just wanted to solve the problem, and I guess building a company was the way to solve it. But before BeMobile, we built a pretty sizable cybersecurity practice in banking. So we used to do all the security and compliance for the banks. So that's how I got to know a lot about banking and the inefficiency and how a bank works and all that stuff. but we were essentially a technology vendor and advisor for security purposes. So when we had an exit on that business in 2019, I always wanted to do something in Africa. And
what was the name of that company, the security company?
A Privacy.
Say it again.
A Privacy. It's Waterloo-based company, but I used to be based out of Hong Kong because Asia was the biggest market.
Right. Okay.
I spent a couple of years in Hong Kong, and we serviced, tier 1, tier 2 banking insurance players.
Okay.
Yeah. So 2019, we exited that business, a bit more time, a bit more money than before. And I always wanted to do something back on the continent. I care about financial inclusion, so that's what I wanted to do. And then the question becomes, if you really want to do financial inclusion, what does it mean? How do you measure it? How, practically, is it through a foundation? Is it through investment? Is it through? And we looked at education, healthcare, finance, and ended up on finance as the better lever to do it, and on a for-profit with purpose model. Because if you really want to get the scale, we didn't think foundation was the right way to go. And so B-Mobile Africa was born, and the rest is, is history.
Fascinating. Okay, so let's get down and dirty on B-Mobile Africa. You're already offering services in 30 countries, and you're doing so for free, or real time and for free, and using stablecoins and DeFi. So, walk us through that. Is this a consumer-facing application? Do people download it, or is it something they access through somewhere else? What is the actual process by which an individual living in one of those 30 markets would be able to access the payment rail and savings tools that you've developed using blockchain?
Yeah, so you started with the mission of the company is to lift 100 million people out of poverty. So it has nothing to do with banking. So it was just okay, how do we do that? Financing is one of the way. And so when we looked at what does the market need, it was very clear that you can have a payment-driven proposition, you can have a credit access proposition. There's multiple ways to go about it. But when we looked at, is there commonalities across the 54 markets and across the continent? Because it's obviously multiple markets, multiple level of sophistication, multiple infrastructure. And we found out that we didn't guess it, we just asked people on the ground. Identity was a huge issue. Because people assume, well, there's a lot of their passport. Yeah, but not everybody's a passport. And even the countries that have ID cards, if the baby is born in the village and nobody registered the baby, they're not in the system. They don't have an ID card. So identity, which most people will assume from the West that it's a solved issue, it's not.
No.
And if you want to do banking, well, you got to have identity sorted out. Otherwise, you know your customer and anti-money laundering is not going to fly.
Right.
The second thing was domestic payment is still massively unsolved. And that is a bit counterintuitive because we've had stuff like M-Pesa in Kenya for 15 years. South Africa is very developed, but there's a lot of countries where essentially the best way to send money from the capital to the village is still through informal ways. I give it to a taxi driver, give it to a taxi. So domestic payment was the other one. And then the third one for the initial value proposition was intra-Africa payment. So sending money from the US to Nigeria, the UK to Ghana, lots of options. If you try to move money from Malawi to Benin, almost impossible.
Yeah.
Or if you do it, it's going to cost a lot, like 10, 12, sometimes 20%. So those were the initial, for us, were we got to crack the payment, even though we didn't want to be a payment company. We got to crack the payment because that is the basis for everything else. On top of, once I have payment, I can do payroll, I can do credit, I can do all the other stuff. And that means that essentially we had to build an infrastructure because nothing existed there.
Yeah, fascinating. We had the team from, I mentioned Corapay on the show about a year ago. And they were describing this exact challenge, which is that, it's cheaper to, send, to drive money, 1,000 kilometers along a dirt road, or to use the taxi service, or, that informal payment network, than it is to send the money. Because if you want to send money, he was describing Nigeria to Ghana because they're next door to each other. The money's going through London and New York before it's getting to the final country. And that's, these payment rails, like the FX part is one part of it, but there's just not that much volume and there's just not enough infrastructure. But, what he was describing basically is, his name's Dixon, by the way, Dixon Nosofor. And what he was describing was just using stable coins as sort of a payment rail, where all you really need is kind of an on-ramp from one currency into the stable coin, and then an off-ramp from that currency, from the stable coin back into the currency. But one of the challenges that I always wanted to understand a little better was, that might be true for, and maybe in Nigeria or in Kenya, with shillings or dollars, whatever, it's pretty liquid. But a lot of those markets, like Malawi, like what's the off ramp from a stable coin into, I don't even know what the local currency is. Like, does that solve the problem really? Because for the person, look, you might say that if you're someone living in Africa, maybe you want to use US dollar stable coins as a way to save money in a currency that's not like inflationary. And there's something to be said about that. But if you want to get the money back into the local currency as a means to like pay for goods and services, the off ramp from the stablecoin is still hugely important. So like what's the implementation challenge there? Because I get the whole, dollar, Nigerian Naira into USDC or USDT into dollars makes sense to me. But like that inter-Africa question still suffers from many of the same obstacles, right? Doesn't it? Or am I missing something?
So you're absolutely right. And that's kind of like what we stumbled upon is for all the payment players and all the stuff. If I tell you, okay, who do you need to use if you need to move intra-Africa, there's not a single player. It like literally does not exist. Yeah. It's informal or it's via, banks of, essentially you end up paying a lot of money. So it's kind of not efficient. And the reason is exactly what you said. If you're dealing Africa to Africa, very often you're dealing with two exotic currencies. So liquidity is a problem. Getting out of the country sometimes is a problem because there's restriction, capital control. Yeah. And then FX. So it's always going one way, right? People want the money to leave. But if you have no counterflow, how do you balance the books? Otherwise, this just doesn't work. So a lot of the people talking about FX and movement of money, essentially it's great on paper. But the reason you haven't really seen anybody cracking that nut is because it's actually very complicated. Right. And by the way, also happens to be a regulated business. You cannot just do whatever you want, right? You have to adhere to multiple regulation, and sometimes they are complete opposite. So being regulated here means you kind of cut off of that market. The way we looked at it is we looked at crypto, but more like blockchain as a technology solution. I'm not religious about it. My view was that's the better tool to do the job. So outside of the on-off ramp, the biggest problem of moving the money is actually the swap. So changing from one currency to another. And that's a huge liquidity. I mean, it has all the problem of FX. So the way you solve it usually is you bulk a lot of volume and then you try to do, so you have liquidity in both, you give out of one, and then you try to rebalance the book. So you are essentially using the existing financial infrastructure to do that, but it's an illusion. You're just trying to optimize. And that doesn't really work because we get to the problem we are today where it's not cost efficient. So if you look at blockchain, it's like, oh, hold on. I can move the asset and I can see that it's been moved. And the FX thing is really more like an AMM, automated market making thing. You have two assets and then price discovery will do, and then you never have a problem of liquidity. So we went that way because we knew it from the crypto world, but it happens to be a very good solution for that exact problem where you don't have to have the preloading of funds. There's always liquidity, price discovery gets done. And that still solves 80% of it. But then the 20% is like, well, but what if the market gets skewed? Well, if you offer a fiat alternative as well, traditional system, then people can do market making and arbitrage. And then the market kind of balances itself. So you have to be a foot in each world to be able to make the crypto blockchain thing viable.
So how does that, you're talking about an AMM to sort of balance liquidity across these different currencies. How does that work? Like you guys, I assume, didn't build your own AMM, or is that what you built almost like your own internal AMM that you use, I'm assuming you seed the liquidity, or I guess how does the sort of liquidity work on the back end to balance all these different currencies?
It's a very good question. So at first it was almost like a hybrid. So we had like an internal, let's call it order book, but it was AMM from day one. And then based on the type of transaction that came our way, we're like, do we route it here? Do we route it via a broker in London, via like multiple way? And then we aggregated it. And then eventually you learn the patterns, the flow, and then you can start designing your AMM algorithm or the parameters around it in the most appropriate way for those kind of currency pairs. And then you have things like, if I've got two African currency, do I AMM against US dollars and then US dollars to the other one? Or do I have a unique pair of those two African currencies? Because sometimes it makes sense, right? So there's a lot of like trial and error that has to go because it has to be fit to the use case. but you always have an imbalance. So then the question is then how do you bring the guys who are true FX, non-crypto people into that stuff? Because we are a neobank for low income. We're not, a market maker in London. And get those guys engaged so that you get an efficient market, so that essentially over time, all your writing gets done by the AMM because it's real time, the price is correct and all that stuff. So it took multiple iterations. And then we had to add some AI because sometimes to go from, South African rand to Cote d'Ivoire XOF, South African rand to Kenyan shilling to XOF is the way. So you need to have some algorithm that will anticipate. And obviously, as you know, because you have gas fee and a bunch of other parameters to take into account, you're going to do a lot of prediction modeling to really be optimized. And then eventually you get to the thing where it kind of ran on its own. But it took probably 2 years to get something sizable because regulatory changes, liquidity is a problem, new rules around currencies. And then once people discover it, you got a spike in volume. So then you got to adjust for that as well. So there's a lot of logistical thing that needs to take place. So
again, correct me if I'm wrong. So this is almost like this is an on-chain AMM that is private. So if certain participants are allowed to sort of participate in it, are they able to LP as well as sort of swap on the?
Yeah, so you are correct. It's all on-chain. You don't see it, but if I give you the smart contract address, you can go see the transactions. But it's not. We don't advertise it as an open text type thing.
Right, and the tokens are and I guess the tokens are essentially just representations of the currencies that are in your
fiat-backed stablecoins. We have bank account, we custody the funds, we just represent them. So on our app, when you use it, you just swap from one currency. It looks like TransferWise. It's very easy. You don't know how it works. It's not to our customers' problem. It's our job, right? It's an internal function. And then once you have the swap, it will just go on chain and swap it. And so at first, we seeded it on a few markets. And then eventually now, because we have a B2C consumer, but we also have a B2B where we serve businesses, large corporate, where those guys have excess liquidity and they may as well earn something on it. So especially if you have a large beer business or a large shopping center business where you have a lot of local cash, well, you might as well make it to productive use and get something on it.
So you guys, sorry, one last question, Alex.
No, go ahead.
So this is pretty fascinating. So you guys, in effect, are almost like your own stablecoin issuer, as well as you built an AMM where people, because you're creating the tokens which represent the assets that you custody yourself, and then which are then shown on chain. I guess my last question before I hand off to Alex is, what you guys built on the Ethereum blockchain? And I guess I'm just curious, like what went into the decision of what chain to use versus also just maybe building your own chain. Just kind of curious on I guess the technical aspect.
Yeah. So it, as I said, it was an iteration. We didn't start day one and let's build a like Circle plus Uniswap together and that's how we're going to change the world. It was not like, it was really, this is the problem we need to solve. How do we solve it? And then that happens to be the way eventually it led to. But the decision on the chain is actually a very big problem because we're a bit early, right? So when you put a few thousand transactions, everything is good. When the gas fee are the $1, you can absorb it. When Ethereum goes crazy and then you get stuff blocked for 2 hours and you got to pay $25 per transaction on a $150 remittance, doesn't really work. So we went through multiple, but we've never considered building our own chain because we're already building essentially a new bank across 54 markets. I've got enough work, right? I'm okay. So our view was eventually the technology will catch up so that we will get, the ZK rollups, all that stuff didn't even exist, but it will be either some kind of layer 2 or there will be a better layer 1. Right now, a lot of it is on Solana. But there are one more chain that that has sidechain, let's say, that is a good also infrastructure for us where we may essentially be multi-chain, but you have obviously liquidity. There's a lot of constraint in being multi-chain, but yeah, Solana was for us the best tool. We went through Hyperledger, through Ethereum, and then eventually Solana.
It's fascinating. So a couple of questions. Number one, the B2B part makes a lot of sense because the dollar values are much larger. And also if you're like a business, you already are banked. And so like you can deposit some obscure African currency with you and then use the stablecoin AMM system, right? So like that to me is really like obvious. But there's also the matter of like the unbanked themselves. So in order to access the AMM, like in order to actually, move one African currency stablecoin to another African currency stablecoin on your system, don't they also first need to on-ramp that currency into the system? Like how does that work?
Yeah.
Exactly. And are you deposit-taking institution?
Good question.
That's the one thing I'm not clear on.
Yeah, it's actually what makes us very unique in the African market is most neobank will try to build their business, and I'm trying to get the client from you, and it's kind of like a zero-sum game. And our view was said, well, the market is too big anyway. We're going to make
Can I ask a question? Why would that be their approach, given the fact that most people in the continent are not even banked to begin with? Like, why are they fighting over the few that are? Is that just because they view the unbanked issue as like an intractable problem?
I don't know. Logically, it doesn't make sense. My personal view is that because a lot of those businesses have received funding from Silicon Valley, and they're trying to apply a specific framework on how the business grows and how it should grow, on the let's grab as many users as possible and try to figure out how we monetize, as opposed to what is the business that makes sense. So you've seen a lot of money being poured, a bunch of user grab, but they're not really using the product because there's no real product. It's a lot of like front on top of a bank. And that's why eventually it doesn't end up really working. Our view was saying, look, the reason we are where we are, it's an infrastructure problem. We're going to create a digital bank because people need to interact with the infrastructure. But I'm in the highway building mode. So if I build the infrastructure, well, of course, my own bank is going to use it, but I can give it to a bunch of other people that serves markets where I'm not present, and through kind of revenue share and stuff, it still makes sense. So that's how we got to the B2B, which is where businesses, we used to take care of African currency, but we also have euros, USD, Canadian dollars, and a bunch of other currencies, right? Pound. And so when those guys came, then they were customer business, or it was B2B, but then it became B2B2C because they also have large consumer, if you retail, fast food, beer type of thing. So then those users got onboarded into our platform. But sometimes they're like an indirect user. And that's because our business model was, yeah, we'll give you the Rails, just use the Rails. Like you use Swift, you use SEPA, you use whatever, local domestic. That's one more Rails. We don't tell you to unplug anything, but you're probably going to get some value here because it does things better and faster and cheaper. So that's how we grew the business. So what people see on the consumer side is really the mini bank account wallet type because they have nothing else. But on our B2B side, some of the clients are like banks, telecoms, and all that stuff, which gets back to your question is, how do you do the on-off ramp? Well, I don't want to build an on-off ramp network. So let me use my clients since they already have the liquidity. And then, if you could go to a, chicken fast food chain and deposit cash and then it will credit your wallet, everybody wins. And you're probably going to buy some more chicken anyway. So we took the approach of saying, we need to partner. We don't want to be in that business. We can't do everything. The infrastructure is big enough. And then eventually, so now you're correct. With our bank now, or digital bank, because we're not a full bank, but you can have mobile money, you can have bank account, you can have sometimes cash deposit. There's multiple options for you to get money in and out of the system, which involves us directly or a partner or a client.
Yeah, I like that. It's like turning, people are using all these different retail locations anyway to do transactions. Like, why isn't this one way to do transactions? I guess the question then would be, I know Andrew wants to jump in here too, but like, what's a regulation around that? Because, people could be laundering money through chicken joints. Like, all of a sudden the chicken joint's doing $10,000 a day of like, the volume of people onboarding money or something like that.
Anti-money laundering, I mean, we are fully compliant across including the US, Europe. So we'll do all the work. But it's actually not really a case because keep in mind that in the underserved segments, people are just trying to go on with their life. They like right now they're just trying to solve basic necessity. It's like, how do I get paid? How do I, save? How do I pay for the school fee of the kids? It's really basic stuff that we're doing. It just doesn't exist, which is cash pay. And because it's cash, it's informal economy. They can get all the other services. So that's not so much of a concern. And also, it's a lot of small amounts. So like, you're not going to really launder money. Like, I mean, $10 at a time is going to take a long time, right?
Yeah, of course.
The side benefit is everything we do is on chain.
Yeah.
So compared to an actual bank or something, like you You can have full audit of all the transactions at any given time of who does what. So we are less susceptible to that. But the whole premise was, well, we already have a network of people. Why don't we? I mean, we even try to push the envelope on. If you've been to South Africa, you have guys at the traffic lights selling you all kinds of stuff like chargers, whatever, T-shirts. Yeah. Well, those guys are a group of people, so there's no safety issue because there's quite a few of them, and it's all cash business. So they've got a bunch of cash because they buy and sell stuff. Can we use those guys as human ATM? You want to cash out money, you stuck at the traffic light. That was shut down from a regulatory standpoint, so we couldn't do that one. But we were trying to, print them with QR code T-shirt and say, look, those resources are already there. Let's put them part of the system, give them a commission, and they're selling one more service. But regulation obviously limits you, but regulation is really in Africa in its infancy. So there is a huge educational gap that needs to be solved before you see proper regulation or the right regulation. Right now, you have a lot of ban because people don't understand it, or yeah, it's legal, but there's no real framework, so some of the big players cannot come. There's a lot of challenges that needs to happen across multiple countries, right? It's not just one country. Africa is a huge continent.
Well, go ahead, Andrew. Yeah.
Yeah, no, sorry. My question, I guess, was one thing that would be really, I'm not sure if you've been sort of following the rise of DeFi protocols over the last kind of 3 years. Obviously, our podcast is called DeFi Decoded, so we're very interested in that. So I guess my two questions are, first is, I'm just curious to hear more about how you guys integrate into sort of outside DeFi protocols, if any. And then second is there any I guess long-term vision, obviously regulatory permitting, that you guys effectively become your own DeFi protocol, such that someone like myself or Alex could be a liquidity provider to the AMM? So
it's funny you ask that, because essentially what we are already is a full DeFi neobank. You just don't see it. Like so we talked about payment, which is essentially fully decentralized, FX as well. The movement of money peer-to-peer is on-chain, wallet to wallet. You just don't see it. On our savings offering, it actually plugs to yearn type, stuff. So we have multiple protocols that who generate yield in USD or euro through stable coins. And then we have an aggregator. We build some kind of optimization software, and that's how we generate yield for the customer. And it works quite well, because sometimes someone may save $20 with us. $20, the bank's not going to take it. It's too small. But with me, with a full DeFi, it's liquid. I mean, it has all the primitives that I need, right? So that's already how it is. I think we'll do more and more, especially when it comes to credit lending, all that stuff. We haven't even touched that. But I will say 80% of what we do is already essentially fully decentralized, which means that I don't need that many people. I mean, we cover 30 markets. It's a 15-people team. Very efficient.
Can you quantify the size of the business? So you're in 30 markets and various services. Like, is it transaction volume, revenue? Like, how big is this? Is the company?
So 30 market, meaning we serve people. Like, if you're in that market, we'll take care of you if you have a problem.
Yeah,
whatever.
Got that.
The app is on the App Store. Like, we've guys in Colombia are using it, but we don't. They just download the app. They want a USD euro account. They don't use the African currency. Maybe they have their on-off ramp through Bitcoin to USDC, whatever. Like, sure, but we don't take care of that. We only care about, we are spending actively time on the low income and the B2B2C. Out of those 30 markets, you really have 3 areas that are big. South Africa is very big for us. West Africa Francophone, so Benin, Togo, all the way to Senegal, like the XOF currency, because it's the underserved market. And a bunch of restriction. The currency is pegged, but technically, if you try to do FX, very difficult. And then, for some reason that I'm not quite sure, Kenya. Kenya is very big for us.
Well, Kenya scores pretty high. Like Chainalysis does their rankings of like adoption, Web3 and crypto adoption, and I think Kenya is the number 1 in Africa in terms of like penetration. So it makes sense that like a big populous country that's got crypto native population would use the app. I think. I mean that's
Nigeria is obviously big. We don't do a lot in Nigeria because it's actually quite served by a lot of people. But there's also regulatory challenges and stuff with the Naira itself, like collecting the actual currency. But if we were to turn on the tap, Nigeria would be very big. But we don't do it currently. So this is like the kind of high level description. And then you have, obviously for us, the UAE is also a very big market because a lot of the African conglomerate and headquartered in the
remittances.
UAE.
Yeah.
So on paper, you'll see we have a lot of B2B, which are UAE domicile company, but they usually have some kind of import export. They do something with Africa, and they're usually African kind of shoulders. So that's the thing. On kind of metrics, just what's public. I mean, we don't publish everything, but first year we did about 20 million US in volume on the platform on the low income, which is pretty good. And we cleared the first year about $500,000 in profit. We've never raised the dollar. To this day, we've never raised the dollar. Second year, we pivoted to B2B, so it went down, and then this year went up. And I think another thing that is public is in the 6 months, 2022, so last 6 months of last year, we grew about 1,000%. So that, yeah, it's like we don't do marketing and sales because we literally do not need new customer. We need more people onboarding existing customers, because once you have B2B is okay, but because B2B2C, like one client may come with like 3 million users. Well, it takes a fair amount of time to onboard 3 million users. You cannot just do it overnight. And there's staging, and so there's operational stuff. If those users are in a remote village in the north of the country, they are additional, work that needs to be done. It's just not download an app. If they don't have an app, or if they don't have a phone, you need to have someone in the village with an iPad. Like, there's a lot of complexity to it. But I will say, yeah, we will be probably at the end of the year in the kind of couple million user range.
That's terrific. So one question I have, we had Dixon from Corpay on, and you mentioned Nigeria is really well served. I think that's the market where they do most of their business.
Yeah.
And it's the most populous country in Africa, and probably has the most vibrant fintech sector. But it also has, as you pointed out, a government that is kind of hostile towards crypto, and specifically actually towards the US dollar stablecoins, because they're worried about dollarization, that people are going to start substituting dollars for the local currency. And that's going to reduce the efficacy of the central bank and reduce the government's control of aspects of the currency and the economy. But what you're describing is something a bit different, because you're creating stablecoin markets in local African currencies. In a way, you're also helping to buttress the fiat system there. And I'm wondering if, as a result of that, you found that governments are supportive of what you're doing, or do they view you as a neutral company to be, regulated like any other? Do they view you as a threat or a disruptor in a negative way, or do they view you as some sort of like positive thing that helps them? And if it's, it doesn't have to be a satisfying answer. I'm just very curious.
So my view is, because our mission is to lift people out of poverty, we have to get it right. I don't care. It's not about being on a magazine or raising a bunch of money. It's about fixing the problem, which means that I have to personally spend a lot of time with central bank, minister, head of state, to really explain what it is, because blockchain, Bitcoin, and crypto is not the same thing. And no, it's not true that it's all criminal. Let's get down to the fact. And my job is to say, those are the facts, make your own opinion. But there's a very large educational gap for people, even at central bank, to really understand what is it that you do, what is it that they do, how is it different. So I would say we usually looked at with caution. But of course, I mean, I lived there for many years. So my approach may be slightly different, because I understand the domestic kind of, I don't want to say politics, but the local context. But the central bank and the government, their view is this going to torpedo the country? Are we going to lose, monetary policy? Are we they have challenges that are real, and that you have to address them. But I've yet to see a single central bank or a single government that spent enough time on trying to understand what it is, didn't become a fan or supporter of blockchain, DeFi, and all that stuff. Because keep in mind that people in government in Africa also live in Africa. So they themselves, maybe they're a bit more privileged, they make more money, but they also see the inefficiency, and they also see the gaps in the market. So it is to their benefit to develop their own country, make the citizen richer, and all that stuff. So most people get that, but it's just right now, and especially if we talk about DeFi, it's made by techies for techies. It doesn't have have you ever tried to even just do a DeFi transaction? If you're not in the industry, my mom will never be able to do that.
Of course not.
We need to have a large kind of ease of use gain to make it completely transparent so people use it without knowing that they're using it. And at the government level is the same. So I would say in some countries, neutral, some country positive, some country, they are worried not about us, but about what opening the door to this kind of technology could be and how it could affect certain vested interest in the country, because it will displace the bank, it will displace some of the known players as well, which happen to be pretty wealthy people in those countries.
Yeah. That's fascinating. Well, Cédric, it's been an amazing discussion. You've taken on a really big opportunity and a big challenge as well. And so far, it seems like you've had some good early success. So we'd love to continue to hear more about what you're up to hear more about how the rollout goes across Africa, what kinds of new products and services you launch, and would hope to have you back on the show soon to give us an update. In the meantime, can you just tell our guests, or tell our audience rather, where they can find out more about what you're doing, you, the business, etc.?
bemobileafrica.com. Everything is there, and then from that website you can download the app. Everything I just told you, you don't even have to believe me. You can just download the app and try it yourself. And if you send money, is the money gone? Did you get charged the right amount of fee and all that stuff? And I think anybody who's interested in supporting, they can reach out there, and we will need all the help we need to really fix that problem.
Yeah, terrific. Okay, well, thanks again. That's been our episode of DeFi Decoded. A really amazing conversation. One of the best episodes we've had in a while, in my humble opinion, honestly. So you can become one of our repeat guests, Cédric, because it's a big problem. It's not going anywhere, but solutions are pretty exciting. So we'll see everybody next week. That's it. Andrew was supposed to give us his rundown from Paris, but we got this great guest instead. So people will have to wait a little bit longer. But Andrew was in Paris for ETH, CC, and a whole bunch of other events, and has a big update for us to share. So looking forward to that episode. Until next time, take care, and that's it. Bye.
The information contained herein does not constitute an offer or solicitation by anyone in the United States or in any other jurisdiction in which such an offer or solicitation is not authorized, or to any person to whom it is unlawful to make such an offer or solicitation. Prospective investors who are not residents in Canada should contact their financial advisor to determine whether securities of the funds may be lawfully sold in their jurisdiction.